Welcome back, everyone. I just wanted to follow up by sharing some best practices surrounding testing. So, in a previous video, I showed you just enough to get started with some basic unit testing. I showed you how to write a test, I introduced you to different matchers, and I shared some reasons for writing tests. To recap, those reasons are to 1. Assure other developers who might look through your code that everything works as expected. 2. Make required inputs and outputs explicit, especially if you're using something like JavaScript. 3. Make refactoring relatively painless. Now, like anything else you learn in programming, the only way that you'll get good at testing is to actually get your hands dirty and write some tests yourself. I know testing can look like a daunting task, but if it's done right, it's actually one of the easier parts of software development, and it can provide a huge return on investment. Unit tests are a great place to start if you're new to the concept, but I'd like to share a few best practices regarding how to get the most out of your tests before moving on to other techniques. So the number one rule when it comes to any kind of testing, I'm just going to get this out of the way now, is to make sure that your tests are as modular and as easy to read as humanly possible. You should be able to look at my tests and know exactly, almost instantly, what my function is meant to do. I mean, think about it. If another developer is looking at your code for the first time, or you're looking at someone else's code, the primary focus is going to be on how it works in production. We don't want to waste our precious time and mental resources just understanding what's even going on in the code. A well-written test is like a friendly assistant who can give you the rundown on everything currently happening so that you can focus on the important stuff, like creating new features or fixing nasty bugs. Now, I'm going to show you how to structure your tests so they can actually be useful. And I'm going to do this by walking you through a couple of tests I wrote. So we're going to start with something simple here, okay? So we're going to start with a simple test, and then we're going to move on to something a little more complex. So this first function, I'm just going to give it away. It's a function that converts a string into camel case so that it can act as a key for a JavaScript object. Oh, look, I even say it right here. It takes a string and converts it to an ID in camel case. Duh. Okay, so let's look at the test for it. Now think of your test as having 3 parts to its structure. The first part is a description of what's being tested. The second part is a description of the circumstances that you're testing. And the third part is the expected result. Now, the first two are very easy. It's described by these kinds of strings right here. And I talked about these strings a little bit, but they don't seem like they're much, but they're quite functional. This is the first one, convert ID function. You're just describing exactly what you're testing, and it'll show up right here in the CLI. So that means if I were to change this to hello world, 3 exclamation points, why not? And look at that. It shows down here, hello world, and same thing that you would expect here. If I change this to, it should, so that should show up down here. See, look, it should, okay? Obviously, that's not very useful, but you get the point. You should try to make these as descriptive as possible. One way to think about it is to think of them in terms of business language rather than programming. I mean, that might not be the case for here, but it'll be useful for some of the more complex things that we'll get into. And so the third part is just all of this right here, your expect. Now think of your expectation as broken down into 3 further steps, and we're going to call that AAA, just like that. And AAA stands for arrange, act, and assert. That's all you're doing here, okay? So luckily, this test is so simple that we don't even need to think about arrange. There's not much that we're doing here. Arranging basically just means that you're setting code up so that it can be tested. You're setting up the circumstances. We don't really need to do that here, but you'll need to do it for more complicated functions. So all we have here is the act and the assert. This is our act right here. You're running the function and you're storing the result in a variable. That's about it. That's act. And then assert is basically just this. That's it. Just structure your tests like this, and they will be nice and easy to read. So now we're going to try doing this with a much more complicated function, okay? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to look through this. I'll scroll through it so that you'll be able to see the whole scope of it. And I want you to see if you can figure out what this function is supposed to do. So I'm going to give you a minute to just pause. You don't need to know what's going on down here. This is the important stuff right here. And then I'll just scroll through here just so you can see what's happening here. Just pause. I hope you're pausing. I hope you're looking. I hope you're trying to figure it out. Okay, so now I'm assuming that you've paused. So basically what this function does is that it loads sounds. Well, duh, it loads sounds. It basically takes an array of IDs and basically loads up sounds so that they're ready to play, okay? And then it returns a function called play that takes an ID and plays a sound that's in the object. Hopefully that was clear. If you got all of that just by looking at my tests, great. If you didn't, then that basically means that I have to rewrite my function. Okay? So to recap, your tests should be broken down into smaller steps. Okay? So the first thing you gotta write is 1, what are you testing? 2, what circumstances are you testing? And then 3, what is the expected result? And then that can be broken down into further steps. So A is arrange, set up your code. B, act, run the function. And C is assert. If I can spell assert right. Basically just check the outcome. That's all it is. So basically the way this plays out here in this monster of a function, we're not really doing a lot of, actually this statement right here is one big arrange function. It's basically just setting up mocks because when you run Jest, it doesn't pick up on web audio stuff. So basically this is just saying, hey, if you come across web audio stuff, just pretend to run. That's all this is saying. And there's not much setup. I guess there could be a step 4, like this would be cleanup, basically just resetting the mocks. And this would be our arrange right here. So you're just basically running the function, you're getting the function back, and then you're going to play that function. And then you're just expecting a bunch of stuff to happen. So hopefully this was helpful, and I hope to see you back here soon.